Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh, or you can catch us anywhere you get your podcast from. We are going to get this out as expeditiously as possible because dealing Kyle Dubas is working both phones at the trade deadline this year, and we have plenty to discuss. First, we're going to recap a wild Wednesday night for the Pittsburgh Penguins, which included two trades, multiple players going to and from the organization, and players that you could see as soon as Friday evening against the Vegas Golden Knights. Then we'll discuss what could be next with over a day still remaining until the NHL's trade deadline, and we'll close things out by reacting to a former Penguin re-entering the NHL with the reigning Stanley Cup champions. Let's get started on the Tip of the Ice-Burgh. And I want to start things off with the way that I planned, and you know what they say, you make plans, God laughs, but I planned to conclude this episode with a Pens poll that I put out yesterday on our community page at Tip of the Ice-Burgh on YouTube, saying how many Penguins will be traded between now and the NHL trade deadline on Friday at 3 p.m. 5% said none. Sorry to tell you 5%, you're already wrong. 35% said 1 to 2. You're hanging on by a thread. 49% said 3 to 4, which I don't know if you're pretty safe sitting here right now either. And 11% said 5 plus. And genuinely, Horwat, I think that might be the correct percentage.
It might be a touch high, but just the way the vibes are feeling now, the way it is a seller's market, and that's exactly what the Penguins are. That just could be the go-to answer. That just could be the way it is. Especially considering, we'll dive into the details. I forget, you asked whenever you ran down players a couple episodes ago and asked if they were going to get traded. I think for Desharnais, I think I said no, just because of the flip factor. But the Penguins might not be done flipping. So there's plenty to unpack and plenty to discuss when it comes to, sure, just a pair of moves in the matter of a couple of minutes last night. But over the next 36 hours or so, or however many hours it is, it's going to be quite fun. It's going to be quite fun all around the league as well for those hockey fans outside of Pittsburgh.
So let's go in the order of events from Wednesday night, starting with the Pittsburgh Penguins trading away Vincent Desharnais to the San Jose Sharks. They get back a 2028 fifth-round pick in return. Man, was that a quick flip, Vinny Desharnais. He was acquired as part of the Vancouver deal for Marcus Pettersson and Drew O'Connor on February 18th. He played 10 games as a member of the Pittsburgh Penguins, almost the Dmitry Kulikov effect for Vinny Desharnais. He was a -4 in that time, outscored 7-1. So we got exactly what you would expect from Vincent Desharnais. But are you surprised that Kyle Dubas and the Pittsburgh Penguins were able to flip him that quickly?
That quickly, yeah, I think that's what surprised me a little bit. I'm not shocked that it happened. I didn't know you could make trades for drafts 4 years ahead of time, 3 years ahead of time, but that was something to see. As for Desharnais, it also good that San Jose took on the whole contract because it always seemed a little bigger than what he was worth. But I've never seen a bad team have so much fun. So Desharnais is going to a heck of a situation in San Jose. I'll say that. I mean, that young squad is just having the time of their lives and losing every game possible.
Yeah, but that $2 million it feels like the Stanley Cup tax for being on Edmonton last year.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And he played one game in the final, I think.
Yeah, but you're on that roster, and people see you, and they're going to pay you a little bit more.
Yeah, played 16 games in that postseason run, but what did I read? 6'7", something stupid like that.
Yeah,
he's big guy. Yeah, no one's going to be messing with Celebrini and Will Smith with him standing right behind them. It's just an overall good move for both sides, I think. I don't think there's any faults with it. The Penguins knew they weren't going to keep Desharnais long, and boy, it really wasn't long at all, was it?
Yeah, whenever that trade initially went down, I think even I said, eventually it feels like somebody that they could just flip at some point, but probably not by the end of the year, right? Like probably not by the trade deadline, right? So I was surprised, but he was a throw-in in that Vancouver deal just to make the money work. Yeah. So I'm not overly shocked that they ended up moving him in the end-all be-all. Like I didn't expect him to get to the end of his current contract as a member of the Pittsburgh Penguins, but I am surprised that it happened this quickly. Now, I can't remember where I saw it. I believe it was David Pagnotta of the fourth period, who said that the San Jose Sharks were kind of knocking on the door to acquire Vancouver Canucks defenseman Vinny Desharnais before he was included in the trade to the Pittsburgh Penguins. Instead, they, flipped Cody Ceci. That's what they wanted. They wanted a Ceci for Desharnais trade is what Pagnotta initially said, if that was him. So there was already interest from the San Jose Sharks from what was that 3 weeks ago when the initial trade went down. So the fact that they came out and got him for a 5th round pick in a long time from now, it makes some sense, especially for the Pittsburgh Penguins to, as you mentioned, trade him away and not have to retain any of that, because, as we'll get into, that one retention spot could play a big role in the next 24 to 30 hours, depending upon when you listen to this podcast. But no, I was very surprised that the Penguins were able to flip him. And when that happened, I said, all right, this is not what I thought would have led off trade deadline week. First of all, I was surprised that he was traded already to begin with. But secondly, as we'll get to, there are a lot of other names that have been in the rumor mill, and it has not been Vinny Desharnais. And it felt like this was something that there might have been another shoe to drop. And lo and behold, it was. A couple minutes later, Pittsburgh Penguins execute a second trade in the matter of, what was it? Like, it felt like 5 minutes, but it might have been longer than that.
Probably about a half an hour, give or take.
However long it takes to get a hold of the NHL Central whatever and actually get the trade to go through. But the Pittsburgh Penguins then traded Michael Bunting to the Nashville Predators, along with a 2026 4th round pick. And in exchange, they bring in veteran defenseman Luke Schenn and center Tommy Novak. This one, I think, shocked the system a little bit more. I said last week, after news came out of Michael Bunting's appendectomy, that I think that probably closes the door on Michael Bunting getting traded before the deadline, because who knows when he's going to be able to make his return from that. But here we are, a day before the deadline, and Michael Bunting is already out the door in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, honestly, the more I think about it, the more it really is a good trade, again, for both teams. Because what's Nashville doing this year? Nothing. But they are keeping those main pieces around that they acquired over the offseason, and they're going to retool and go for it again next year with, on paper, a pretty good roster, a very good roster. And Michael Bunting adds to that. So next season, first of all, everyone already expects the Predators to go into next season much better. And like you said, we really don't know when Bunting is going to be able to return. So screw it. If he doesn't play for the rest of the season in Nashville, so be it. He comes back healthy next year, has a full camp under his belt, has all the momentum of a preseason. Nashville goes into next season flying. That's a heck of a move. And for the Penguins, getting Tommy Novak, at least starting with that one, is those reclamation project pieces. Another one from Nashville. But
I don't know if that's a reclamation project. This guy was a first-line center down there.
In Nashville, though. But I get it. It's a much higher standard of if it is a quote-unquote reclamation. Nashville needed those small changes. That's going to be one of them. Michael Bunting is a good piece for them. Tommy Novak should be a good piece for the Penguins at the center position. We'll see how all the things line up through the rest of the season, through next training camp and preseason. It should be interesting. It should be entertaining. I think just overall a win-win for both sides. And quick note on Bunting, has he had a heck of a season?
Not even a season, a 2025. Like January 2025, he gets into a car accident.
Yep, that's what I was. Yep.
Struggles between then he gets an appendectomy, and now he's traded to the Nashville Predators. So obviously, Michael Bunting is somebody that endeared himself to the Penguins fan base very quickly, and certainly fits the mold of what Barry Trotz likes in his forward. So he should probably fit well down in Nashville, and that's a place that a lot of people like to play. So, hopefully things turn the corner for Michael Bunting's 2025, and he can stay healthy and his insides stay where they're at and don't explode anymore throughout this year.
Yeah, and not only that, but just that even before the car accident in the early portions of the season, getting scratched for just struggling. He's just had a heck of a season. He's had a heck of a calendar year in the hockey world, from being part of the Jake Gensel trade out of Carolina to being a house of fire in his first stint with the Penguins, and then the offseason, and then he comes into the season struggling, and then everything sort of happens. It's been a heck of a time. And overall, just quick note, I enjoyed the time that I got to work around Michael Bunting. Seems like a great person, great dude, and I'm excited to see what he does in Nashville, truthfully. I said this about Jason Zucker whenever he left and went to Nashville. Jason Zucker seems like a Nashville player, a Nashville guy. Same goes for Bunting quite a bit. Maybe not as charismatic or outgoing, but that style of play is going to fit Smashville very, very well. And that team, I want it to be good so bad. I want it to be an exciting team.
Yeah, Bunting and Zucker certainly cut from the same kind of cloth there. But I think when you're looking at what the Penguins got in return, as you mentioned, Tommy Novak, he was the key piece. The Penguins, outside of Crosby and Malkin, are relatively barren down the middle of the ice. You have 30-plus-year-old Kevin Hayes right now as the third-line center. You have Nola Chari taking reps as the fourth-line center, but then you also have Lizotte and Glass. But I think we can all agree they don't have top six upside. At least nothing that they've shown this season shows that they can be a top six center. Tommy Novak is a guy who, as I mentioned, despite the fact that he was playing on the 30th team in the NHL, he was a number one center on a team that had, Stamkos is playing the wing, but if they needed Steven Stamkos, he could be the top line center. But Tommy Novak is the guy that they put down there. I've gotten so many messages since that trade went down, most notably from friends of the show, State of Hoppy and Doug Gladkey, that are like, this is phenomenal. Tommy Novak is a lot of fun. He hasn't quite put up star level numbers. He hasn't put up eye-popping goal stats, but he is, according to Jay Fresh, and this is an exact quote yesterday, an analytical darling. And he's a guy who I think the Pittsburgh Penguins are very happy to have as, at the very least, a third line center, not just this year, not just next year, but the year after that. And I think that is a big part of why the Pittsburgh Penguins went out and acquired him. Now, Kyle Dubas on Wednesday sent out an email to Pittsburgh media that detailed kind of the thought process behind some of this and talking about his reaction to the trades that he had just met. And this is via Seth Rorabaugh of the Tribune Review, who then published it, said, quote, the motivation being that Tommy Novak was younger, under team control for an additional season over Michael Bunting, carried a lower cap charge, and is primarily a center. We felt that carried a large amount of value as we move ahead here with our plans. Now, Kyle Dubas, for the most part, since the Jake Gensel trade you mentioned last year, has been making moves towards the future. Draft capital in, young players in, experienced players out. This is an experienced player out, but Tommy Novak isn't necessarily a spring chicken. I'm not saying he's old. He's 27 years old, but that is a little bit on the older side of what we've seen from Kyle Dubas. A la Phil Tomasino's 23. Cody Glass is a similar age. But the way I look at this, you get a guy who can play center in the middle six at least for the next 3 seasons. Something you didn't have in the AHL. I think we all like Vasily Ponomarev, but we're not quite sure when or if he's going to be ready to play elevated minutes as a third-line center, and certainly not going all the way up to second-line center. Evgeni Malkin's time, whether it be next year or if he signs on for another year, is running out. So as we talked about, I believe it was a couple weeks ago, at some point, you might want to address who could step in for him afterwards. Maybe not who's going to be the next star second-line center, but somebody that can actually fill that role. That player wasn't in the organization. I believe it is now with the acquisition of Tommy Novak.
Glad you said it, because that's exactly the direction I was going to go in. At what point do we have the discussion of Tommy Novak taking up that second-line center role? Could it be next season? Could it be the season after? Like I said, even with Malkin still on the roster, does he bump to 3? Does he move to a wing? These are all conversations that, whenever I said a minute ago that the offseason and the training camps are going to be entertaining, that's part of the entertainment. Is Tommy Novak going to usurp that role in a good way, in a positive way for the team and for Malkin? Not in any way saying Evgeni Malkin is bad or demoting him, but just getting that new position set up, especially as the team tries to build a bit for the future. Yeah, he's 27, but having that extra year of control over Bunting and having, for what it's worth, 27 on a Penguins roster is a spring chicken, man. That's he's got another decade on this team if all goes right. So it's the future. It's essentially a pick for bare minimum the next couple of years down the line, maybe the first year or two after the Crosby Malkin tenures.
Now, this is just, slight speculation and having a little bit of fun, but we've seen Evgeni Malkin and Phil Tomasino play very well together over the past week. You know who Phil Tomasino probably knows fairly well? Tommy Novak. So could we see Evgeni Malkin moving to wing, which, as we talked about, Steven Stamkos did this year. As of right now, he's a winger, despite being a center through most of his career. Does Malkin move to wing, and we eventually, at some point, see Tommy Novak centering Evgeni Malkin and Phil Tomasino? Quite possibly.
Hope so.
Quite possibly. So that is an option for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, Novak wasn't the only piece that came back in this trade. Let's talk a little bit about Luke Schenn, a name that I think everybody is fairly familiar with. He's a big physical defenseman, better defensively than Vincent Desharnais, and I think he just immediately takes up the roster spot on the third pairing on the right side. But I think you get a little bit better in terms of the actual position of defense out of Luke Schenn than you would get out of Vincent Desharnais, and I don't think anybody would dispute that. Brings that same physicality, maybe even a little bit more. But I think what some have discussed to this point, simply because Luke Schenn is going to have a market here still in the next 24 hours, is could he be flipped before the NHL trade deadline? Less than 24 hours and not a game played. Could he be sent out of the city of Pittsburgh? Do you believe that has any chance of happening here before Friday at 3?
I do. I kind of do. I wouldn't be shocked if it does. I wouldn't be shocked if it doesn't. Like Dreger and Johnston both said, the Penguins do like what Schenn brings, and that leadership aspect, his poise for the game, and all of that stuff. They had the same exact tweet, and all of a sudden I'm forgetting it. But you get what I'm saying. Tweet,
but one said, "Yeah, don't expect it to happen." One said, "Yeah, it could happen."
It could happen, and I'm gonna ride the train of it could happen. It was his character, leadership, toughness, and spirit. Those were kind of the adjectives that the Penguins used to describe Luke Schenn. That's if they keep him around. That they're not going to be disheartened by not landing another deal. Essentially, Luke Schenn has Stanley Cup pedigree, so there is something there, which you can find at spades in Pittsburgh. There's no problem with Stanley Cup pedigree in that locker room. But some teams who are going for it for their first time might want something like that, and at a full value of $2.75 million, chop that in half for this year and next. It's a relatively nice deal. Yeah, he's 35 and probably doesn't bring the same amount of energy and on-ice potential that he did, especially when he was winning cups with Tampa Bay during the lockdown seasons. But it's still a net positive for a team. I'm thinking I'm not going to be able to exactly name teams, but a team that doesn't have a cup yet that's going for it. I think of Winnipeg right away.
It's hard not to think of Toronto, isn't it?
Try that experiment again. Yeah, but just those teams that don't have a cup yet or haven't won in a long time, like maybe a Dallas, who has been kind of digging for defense, but it sort of depends. Just one of those top teams that maybe want that extra cup pedigree in their lineup to be the veteran leader. Like I said, Winnipeg, Dallas, Minnesota. I'm just naming teams from the Central.
Yeah, essentially, because the Central Division is pretty much Colorado, and then nobody else has won it since Chicago, and Chicago is far from that as of right now. If I'm not mistaken, the Penguins do have one retention spot remaining for this season, but here's the thing. Petrie and Riley Smith both drop off at the end of this season, so that's when you can come back into, well, if they need to retain on Erik Karlsson. We all agree that it's unlikely that Erik Karlsson gets dealt. It's not impossible, but it's unlikely that he gets dealt by tomorrow. So if you instead choose to use that retention spot for the remainder of this season on Luke Schenn, you can make him a very attractive asset, especially, as you mentioned off the top of the show, for a very much so seller's market. But I feel, and again, feelings can change this week at the deadline, because this has been a crazy, crazy week in all sports, not just the NHL. But I feel that they'll end up keeping Schenn around, especially for, as you mentioned, the comments that we heard from the organization last night in those emails that were disseminated throughout, Pittsburgh sports media. Again, I saw mostly from Seth Rohrabaugh of the Tribune Review. Now, the final count from Wednesday, if you are looking for a quick summation of what the Penguins did on Wednesday night, going out is Vincent Desharnais and his $2 million cap hit that was on this season and next. Michael Bunting and his cap hit that was $4.5 million for this season and next. And the 2026 fourth round pick. Coming into the Pittsburgh Penguins organization is 27-year-old center Tommy Novak, who's at $3.5 million for this year, next year, and the year following. Luke Schenn, who has a year coming up after this one at 2.75, and a 2028 5th-round pick. So all in all, Kyle Dubas brought in a younger center, brought in a slightly graded right shot defenseman over Vinny Desharnais, and moved back around and back 2 years with a draft pick, saving $250,000 in cap space and adding that extra year of Tommy Novak is probably the other thing that we didn't mention here. That was key for the Pittsburgh Penguins, but a tidy piece of business from Kyle Dubas on Wednesday evening. Now, that doesn't mean that he's done. In fact, the fact that those are the 2 moves that happened tells me that he is far from being done. We have talked about a lot of players that could have been traded. Michael Bunting was not among the top of conversation. Vinny Desharnais was not among the top of the conversation. Guys like Beauvillier, guys like Matt Grzelcyk, guys like Nola Chari, who was talked about earlier this week on 32 Thoughts, the podcast, and guys like Rickard Rakell have all been floated out there and all remain for the time being, as of this recording, which I will timestamp it because this could be outdated in 5 minutes, 8:28 a.m. on Thursday. None of those players have been traded yet. Rakell's the interesting one because we have said all week it's unlikely, the price is going to be too high. People aren't going to be willing to pay it because Kyle Dubas is going to keep that high price on Rickard Rakell. All of a sudden, the market seems like people are willing to pay very high prices at this year's deadline. So now, as we sit here today, is it more beneficial for the Penguins to move Rickard Rakell now as opposed to in the summer when initially we all thought his value would be higher because of the higher salary cap?
I think his value is higher now. I mean, we're seeing what certain players are going for. We're seeing the trend of return across the league in these moves. There's one thing you can, it's not a guarantee, but it's a bit more of a guarantee right now. And that is that Rickard Rakell will at least finish this season pretty strong. Once an off season hits, once the summer months go by, once a training camp restarts into a new season, you don't know exactly what you're getting at all. He could fall off, next season. This 1 year could be one of those like just random acts of, I'm having a great year in the later stages of my career. So the team was going to want to take advantage of that for this season rather than risk he's had a few months off now. They'll be able to fit under the cap, no problem, and he can still do this, and this, but it's not going to be at the same level. That's just the way I look at it. That's the way I can see it. I would say for now, the Penguins are better off trading him away this season, and by this season I do mean today or tomorrow, before taking him into the off season and maybe losing value in terms of what you could get in return. The market is set for sellers now. Who knows what it'll be in the summer?
Yeah, now here's the thing. I don't think Rickard Rakell starts next season on the Penguins. No matter what happens, I think he's traded by this summer because his value, even if he goes out and lays a goose egg in the final 18 games with the Penguins, his value is not going to deteriorate all that much because people will draw conclusions of, well, the team was out of it, this, that, and the other, not to mention the fact that he's not going to get a goose egg because he's playing with Sidney Crosby, who is not going to get a goose egg in the last 18 games of the season, no matter where the Pittsburgh Penguins sit in the NHL standings. But I agree with you. I think that the thought was higher cap equals higher return. But with the way that the market is going right now, I mean, I tweeted it out yesterday, and I'm still surprised that it's only this much. 5 first-round picks, 5 of them have been doled out. And we are still over 24 hours away from the NHL trade deadline. We still have not seen Mikko Rantanen potentially get flipped, which will include a first-round pick likely. If not a first-round pick, certainly a second and many other assets. It is a seller's market to the fullest extent. I don't think anybody expected it to be this way, and anybody expected teams to be this desperate for talent at this point. Now, it makes sense in hindsight because as of right now, there's only a handful of teams that are completely out of the playoff race, and there certainly is no bona fide favorite in either the East or the Western Conference, so everybody feels like they have a chance, and this could be the year. And when that's the case, plus you have that buffer, you have that safety net of, well, the cap is going to go up in the summer, so even if we make a bad move, the blow is going to be lessened by that salary cap going up. And if it works, we could be raising the Stanley Cup. And what are we talking about? That's what we want. So the seller's market is as high as I have seen it in a very long time. I would have to literally go back and do research to think about when sellers have been in a better position than they are right now. And if the offer comes, and it might, you have to take it if you're Kyle Dubas. And nothing based on what he's done to this point and in the past year since the Gensel trade indicates to me that he would turn down the offer if it came.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Especially if that right offer comes along. Like you said, Rantanen is still possibly getting moved again. He'd land a first, if not a first in many assets. He's a different level.
Especially because he's on the expiring deal. So maybe it's not a first because he's on an expiring contract, and we saw how that worked out for Carolina. But
depends on what they are able to, what team is able to land him and possibly sign an extension with. Who knows what the deal could turn out to be. But that being said, even with other rental pieces, like Brock Nelson could land a first if Lou Lamoriello decides to go in that direction. That seems very likely now. I think Scott Lawton's going to be able to land Philadelphia first if they decide to move him. These are players that you don't normally think of landing first-round picks. Rickard Rakell's better than those last two I just said. Straight up, especially this season. Whenever going into the trade situation, I don't think we had expected Rakell to land a first-round pick, especially whenever the season started after the year he had last year. It didn't seem like it. That was a big contract. That was not a great season. Things just seemed unlikely, and then he started scoring a bit. Okay, scoring maybe it's a good second and an asset, and then the cap went up and it went up again, and it was okay. His values continue to increase, and now we're seeing all these other moves. All right, well, yeah, he's definitely going to land you a first. Maybe Emily Kaplan isn't crazy.
Yeah,
I don't know if the rest of that deal could be pulled off, but I mean, if the right deal comes along, it doesn't even have to be an overpay for Rakell. Just landing another first-round pick could be huge for the Penguins. And by the way, New Jersey losing Jack Hughes for the season. If they still want to go for it this year, why not?
I don't know. I think, yes, certainly adding Rickard Rakell helps you if you're New Jersey, but they've been pretty bad for a couple months now.
Yeah,
and I don't know if you go bad for a couple months, you lose the player that was supposed to lead you on a cup run, and your response is going to be, yeah, let's go out and get somebody else and try to salvage the season. No, I think of all the teams that are in the top three of their division, New Jersey is one of those teams that are like, yeah, we're going to pump the brakes a little bit here because, you lose Jack Hughes. That's like Sidney Crosby going down in 2017. Like, you're not going to bring anybody in that is going to replace that and give you the same opportunity at a cup. But again, who knows? Because the NHL is wide open and they have the goaltending this year if Jacob Markstrom stays healthy. So maybe they are a little bit desperate. But no, I think what we're seeing is the potential for a wild 24 hours where the Penguins might look drastically different, not just slightly different, but drastically different. I mean, heck, they already do. Luke Schenn, if not traded again, if not flipped, and Tommy Novak are probably going to be in that lineup on Friday night. Vinny Desharnais is not. Michael Bunting wasn't even with the team as far as I know, because he's recovering from an appendectomy, but we're not going to see him anymore. Like, that is already changing what this lineup looks like at a pretty large level, large scale. I think we're going to see a little bit more of that. Now, outside of Rakell, before we finish off this show talking about a former Penguin getting back in the NHL, what other player are you looking at to say, yeah, their return might be a little bit higher than expected coming into this week?
Ooh, that's a fantastic question. I think the obvious ones that come to mind are, obviously, we said Rakell. It's tough. I don't think Achari is going to land anything bigger than anyone expects.
No, I would be, again, if Achari was traded, I'd be surprised.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, it's tough. Beauvillier is a name that keeps popping up for everyone to say, like, yeah, he's the next trade piece. He's a good trade piece. He's this, that, the other. I mean, he's having a decent enough season, 20 points, 13 goals. I think it would land on him because that cap hit is higher than I think plenty would have expected. But if you're able to send him to his sixth team in the last 30 months, that's a pretty good deal. There's a pretty good deal that could be made there for Beauvillier, I think.
The one I'm looking at is Matt Grzelcyk. I thought Matt Grzelcyk for a third was the absolute best you could get, and I thought that was even unlikely. You in this market, you might be able to get a second for Matt Grzelcyk. I might be out over my skis here, but people are desperate for talent. in
Yeah.
every area of the ice. And Matt Grzelcyk has had himself a really good stretch of games here. And playing next to Erik Karlsson, who has all of a sudden garnered everybody's attention, means everybody, by comparison, is going to be watching Matt Grzelcyk as well. So they will have had a good eye on what Matt Grzelcyk has done since the Four Nations break. And he's played just as you expect him to play. He's played just as he's been playing. So with this market, I think Matt Grzelcyk is a guy that if they trade, it could be a second-round pick. And if that's the case, that is, I mean, hard to deny how great of a move that would be for Kyle Dubas, signing him for 1 year and getting that type of return for the future. But it's going to be a wild next 24 hours. The last 10 minutes of this podcast could be outdated by the time we even end this show. But, you know, it's going to be an interesting day and a half here for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Let's close out this episode with a little congratulations to former Pittsburgh Penguin. I wouldn't say friend of the show because he never joined the show, but somebody that this show backed on multiple occasions. Jesse Puljujarvi signs for the remainder of this season at a prorated $775,000 contract. He was placed on waivers because he needs to be. That's how you re-enter the NHL league. So it's not like they are signing him to waive him and send him down to the AHL. They are signing him. They have to waive him. I imagine he will clear and then might get an opportunity here, especially as you mentioned before we got on here with Matthew Tkachuk's injury and him being out for, at the very least, the rest of the regular season, that we're going to see Jesse Puljujarvi get some opportunities down with the Florida Panthers.
He's going to get some cracks at the lineup. He's going to get some ice time in. Maybe he'll play a few more than 10 minutes a night or whatever he was getting in Pittsburgh. We'll see how he does in that system with that team and with those guys that are hungry to repeat. There's no doubt about that. I mean, they have a very good team, very talented team, even without Tkachuk in the lineup. That's a team to keep an eye on out of the East. Like you also briefly said earlier, there's no real standalone favorite, it seems, in terms of a deep cup run. And the Panthers just coming in as the reigning champions with that sort of momentum. Maybe they have another round or two in them, and who knows how much help Jesse Puljujarvi has. He hasn't really had playoff experience. I can't remember how much he's played, if any, with Edmonton. If it was, I mean, it wasn't much. They only made the final last season without him. So who knows what kind of player Jesse Puljujarvi is in the postseason. And we'll probably get to see a bit of that. So that'll be a good thing for him. And I think the Panthers got a heck of a player, whether it's, you know, wherever he lands in the lineup, could be entertaining, could be fun. And the Panthers are just a good team, man. Doesn't matter who's in that lineup. There's going to be fun, good things happening.
In his career, Jesse Puljujarvi has played in 27 Stanley Cup playoff games, has 3 goals, 3 assists in that time. 2 of those years with Edmonton. And of course,
Carolina.
23, he played in 7-game series for the Carolina Hurricanes. So he has a little bit of experience there. And here's the thing. It's not like we haven't seen it. And I understand. Preseason hockey is preseason hockey. But he wasn't just good in the preseason for the Penguins. He was dominant in the preseason for the Penguins. And that carried over through certain stretches in the regular season. And then his opportunities started to kind of come and go under Mike Sullivan and the Pittsburgh Penguins. I think that if you give him some consistent timing here, which, again, banged up Florida Panthers team, they might have to throw him in there, especially because they're in a position right now where they're not really in danger of falling out of contention for the playoffs and probably not falling out of the top 3 in the Atlantic Division. I think that he could get that consistent playing time with the Florida Panthers. And if he does, there's a chance it all clicks. This is a guy that has always been kind of seen as he does everything leading up to the goal very well. It's just finishing that he struggles with. If he can kind of find that with a team that has been able to get that out of absolutely everybody since going down there the last couple of years, he could be a nice addition for them. And that could be a great spot for him to, again, revive his career, because that's what we thought we were going to see in Pittsburgh. It just didn't work out. Maybe it happens with a better team in the Florida Panthers. Now, the Panthers have several Penguins ties. As we all know, the first Evan to ever be placed on the Stanley Cup is Evan Rodriguez. He is still down there. Dmitry Kulikov, who gets a second shout out, second reference in this episode, he is still down there. And Patrick Hornqvist is a scouting consultant down there. So a lot of Penguins ties, especially now that you add Jesse Puljujarvi. Happy for him because this is a guy that we kept saying, man, we wish he got more of an opportunity in Pittsburgh. Why don't they give him an opportunity in Pittsburgh? When he was cut, or when, I guess you can say it, cut, placed on unconditional waivers for the purpose of termination, only the NHL would have a convoluted name for cut. But when that happened, we both said, I hope he lands somewhere that's going to give him an opportunity. That's really what we want to see. And not only could he get an opportunity to play, but he could get an opportunity to go win a Stanley Cup with the Florida Panthers this year. So shout out to Jesse Puljujarvi. I'll cede the floor to you here. Anything else you want to mention before we jump off and this entire episode gets turned upside down because of more Penguins news?
Oh, man. I don't think there's too much. I mean, looking at the Florida Panthers rosters, I just want to add on to the Puljujarvi discussion. Their bottom two wingers, or their fourth line wingers, are AJ Greer and Jonah Godovic. I think Puljujarvi can make it into the lineup over at least one of those two, don't you think?
I think Gadjevich is liked down there, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they like him enough to play him over Puljujarvi, probably, but AJ Greer, yes.
AJ Greer's played 62 games, 5 goals, 15 points.
Essentially what you would get from Jesse Puljujarvi.
Yeah, Gadjevich, 27 games, 3 goals, no assists. So he's going to at least get the chance to play over one of those two, get that opportunity. And that'll be good for him. That'll be good for the Panthers. And as for the rest of this trade deadline, oh boy, I'm going to need coffee. We're going to need a lot of coffee because, like you said, the Mikko Rantanen thing still has to go down. The Devils now have to just course correct again.
Respond. In some way, shape, or form. They need to respond.
Yeah. I will say, I wanted to make a quick note and then we can get out of here. Whenever you were discussing the seller's market, if Tristan Jarry had stayed in the NHL all season, even if he was bad, but at least maybe finding improvements, man, do you think something could have happened there? I get it's revisionist history now.
No, yes, but even if we go and have that hypothetical of Tristan Jarry was at least a baseline NHL caliber talent this year, which he's not,
right?
I still don't see it. Like, there have been goaltenders moved at this deadline, but how many goaltenders end up getting moved? Right.
Well, John Gibson's not getting moved again.
No. Florida Panthers moved Spencer Knight because they had to bring in Seth Jones. And in response, they had to get a goaltender. And they did.
And Edmonton has stood strong on they don't think anyone is better than Stuart Skinner right now.
Yeah, but what happens if Stuart Skinner goes down? They're screwed. So
exactly.
Maybe they look for a goaltender, but I still think that Tristan Jarry, even if he would be baseline NHL, wouldn't be somebody that they'd be like, you know what, we need somebody in case. Like, that's very expensive break class in case of emergency option.
Yeah, it's just that little seed popped into my head whenever you were discussing the way Matt Grzelcyk has kind of overperformed, and I thought if Jarry was getting those chances to overperform at certain times of the season rather than be in the A, maybe something could have been there, at least for Edmonton, who desperately need a goalie. Sorry, they do.
I will throw one other little nugget in here before we go. If Ryan Graves had one less year remaining on his contract, there might be a chance. It might be the time. But I still think there's just too much term remaining on that contract for somebody to say, you know what? We need an expensive third pairing defenseman. Also, one less year, maybe Kyle Dubas is more willing to retain for those years to get him out of here. I don't think Kyle Dubas, every year that's added on is just 10% less chance that Kyle Dubas is going to retain salary on it. And when it's somebody like Ryan Graves, that chance is down to like 1 or 2%. So, but it is an interesting market. We will see what happens, and we will try to respond as swiftly as possible on Tip of the Ice-Burgh on YouTube. But if you liked this video, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe to us on our YouTube channel at Tip of the Ice-Burgh, or you can catch us anywhere you get your podcast from. Thank you guys for tuning into this one. We will see you next time, which could be, who knows, in like 30 minutes. We'll see you guys soon.